Here at Windsor, the late Queen has been laid to rest after a day of ceremony and sorrow in which the nation and the world bade farewell. As the state funeral began, King Charles followed the procession of his mother's coffin from Westminster Hall. The coffin was carried into Westminster Abbey for a service attended by 2,000 guests, including 500 foreign leaders, royals and dignitaries. All the generations together, the Queen's grand and great-grandchildren in solemn procession.
All who follow the Queen's example and inspiration of trust and faith in God can with her say, "We will meet again."
The funeral march echoed around central London as the coffin was accompanied on its final journey by members of the armed forces from the UK and Commonwealth. Around the country, people gathered in towns and cities to watch the funeral and pay their own respects.
A few of us were singing hymns along and the national anthem, just immensely proud to be British.
It's great how we all come together as a nation.
She'll never be forgotten, will she? Ever, ever.
Then on to Windsor and down the Long Walk. Crowds gathered to watch the Grenadier Guards accompany the late Queen to her last resting place. And the final glimpse of the Queen's coffin before she was buried in a private ceremony in St. George's Chapel here this evening. Good evening from inside the grounds of Windsor Castle, the final resting place of the late Queen. A private burial took place in St. George's Chapel this evening, with Queen Elizabeth interred alongside her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh. It followed a service this afternoon here in honour of her life. Earlier, a day of the highest ceremony, not seen in this country for nearly 60 years, mixed with private sorrow as the state funeral was held in Westminster Abbey, the building in which Queen Elizabeth was married and crowned. King Charles, along with other members of the royal family, walked behind her coffin as it was taken into the Abbey from Westminster Hall, where it had been lying in state. Hundreds of dignitaries, including world leaders, joined members of the royal family and the public at the service. In his sermon, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, said the Queen had touched a multitude of lives during her 70-year reign. We start tonight with our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell on the funeral held today for Queen Elizabeth.
On a clear morning in September, the world focused its attention on London for the grandest and most solemn of events. For a revered monarch who'd reigned for longer than any other, all the honours of a state funeral. Within Westminster Abbey, where great moments of history have been staged for more than 1,000 years, the leaders of many nations came together to pay their tributes. Macron from France, Biden from the United States, Trudeau from Canada, and scores of others. They joined political leaders from the nations of the United Kingdom, all the living British Prime Ministers, faith leaders, charity workers, and citizens, at a moment in the nation's affairs when rank took second place to the desire to pay respect. To the tolling of a single bell, the bearer party from the Grenadier Guards brought the Queen's coffin from Westminster Hall to place it on the gun carriage. At 10:45, the order was given for the cortege to step off.
Funeral procession! Minus 10! Slowly! March!
Walking behind the coffin, the King, his sister, the Princess Royal, his two brothers, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex. Behind them, the Prince of Wales and his brother, the Duke of Sussex. From the Palace of Westminster, around Parliament Square and into Broad Sanctuary, the gun carriage was drawn by 142 members of the Royal Navy. They brought it to the great west door of the Abbey Church, where as a young princess, Elizabeth had been married and later crowned as sovereign. As the coffin was borne up the Abbey's central aisle, among the family members walking behind, two small figures, Prince George and Princess Charlotte, aged 9 and 7 respectively, attending this most solemn of state occasions. On the coffin, a wreath with rosemary for remembrance, myrtle, the symbol of a happy marriage, and English oak, symbolising the strength of love. And a card handwritten by the King, in loving and devoted memory, Charles R.
In profound thanksgiving, we come to this house of God. We gather from across the nation, from the Commonwealth, and from the nations of the world, to mourn our loss, to remember her long life of selfless service.
All the music and readings had been approved by the Queen herself. Included a hymn sung at her wedding. In his sermon, the Archbishop of Canterbury spoke of a life devoted to duty.
People of loving service are rare in any walk of life. Leaders of loving service are still rarer. But in all cases, those who serve will be loved and remembered when those who cling to power and privileges are long forgotten. The grief of this day, felt not only by the late Queen's family, but all round the nation, the Commonwealth and the world, arises from her abundant life and loving service, now gone from us.
After prayers, the sounding of the last post and a 2-minute silence. national anthem was sung, and the coffin was borne from the abbey on the shoulders of the Grenadier Guards. As the funeral procession set off through the wide streets of ceremonial London that she knew so well, a gun salute was fired in Hyde Park. The procession was led by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Canada, the Commonwealth country she visited more than any other. It included military detachments from across the Commonwealth, recipients of the Victoria and George Crosses, and health workers from the NHS. The gun carriage was drawn up Whitehall and past the cenotaph, where the standards of the Royal British Legion were lowered in respect. Following behind the cortege in a vehicle, George and Charlotte with their mother and the Queen Consort. The procession stretched the length of the Mall and beyond. It brought the gun carriage to Buckingham Palace, past the balcony where she'd first appeared in 1927 at the age of 1, and where she'd been seen most recently during her Platinum Jubilee. Up Constitution Hill to Wellington Arch, close to her childhood home on Piccadilly. The military detachments and the bands were drawn up. 3 generations of the royal family watched. The bearer party placed the coffin in the state hearse for the final departure from the capital. The streets of central London had been cleared of all traffic, but the pavements were full, lined with many thousands of spectators who wanted to witness this final journey of their late Queen to her beloved Windsor Castle. The grey of the city gave way to the green fields of Berkshire. The long walk leading up to the castle was crowded for as far as the eye could see. The hearse was flanked by foot guards with their rifles reversed and accompanied on a rural road by the pipes and drums and the household cavalry. The hearse made its way up the long walk. In places, the crowds were standing 20 or more deep. It was at Windsor that the Queen could indulge her passion for horses. As the coffin went by, it was watched by Emma, one of the ponies she'd ridden in recent years. As the hearse entered the main quadrangle of the castle, 2 of the Queen's corgis had been brought out by the Queen's staff. Watching the coffin's arrival at the castle, the King and other members of the family. In St George's Chapel, a congregation of people who'd known or worked for the Queen had gathered for the committal service. This is the chapel she had known as a girl, where she had worshipped as an adult, and where now she will be buried. The Queen's coffin was placed on the catafalque. The Dean of Windsor spoke of her uncomplicated Christian faith and her reassuring presence.
In the midst of our rapidly changing and frequently troubled world, her calm and dignified presence has given us confidence to face the future as she did, with courage and with hope.
At the conclusion of the service, the instruments of state, the imperial state crown, the orb and the sceptre, which had been presented to the Queen at her coronation, were removed from the coffin and placed on the high altar. With the King watching, the Lord Chamberlain, the most senior official in the royal household, broke his wand, the symbol of his authority, to signify the end of a reign, and placed it on the coffin.
Go forth upon thy journey from this world, O Christian soul, in the name of God the Father Almighty, who created thee, in the name of Jesus Christ, who suffered for thee, in the name of the Holy Spirit, who strengtheneth thee.
The public lamentation for the life and reign of Elizabeth II was coming to a close. It was time for the world to draw back, to leave her finally to her family for her burial this evening in a small side chapel alongside her late husband. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, huge crowds gathered in near silence in the streets surrounding Westminster as the Queen's coffin was taken to Westminster Abbey and then here onto Windsor. Many people, young and old, from across Britain had camped out for days to witness the elaborate spectacle of pageantry, pay their final respects and share a moment of history. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning was amongst the crowds on the Mall as those gathered in London paid tribute to the Queen.
Inside the Abbey, kings, queens, presidents and prime ministers. Outside, the ones without titles or palaces. But a rich, collective love for the Queen, almost beyond compare. Her country. The sound of thousands. Total silence down the Mall. A mass of people, but the thoughts individual, personal. The final goodbye. No one wanted this moment to end. They knew that would be the end of this era. From early morning, thousands had streamed onto the Mall, determined to surround the Queen on this journey.
I've got a beautiful picture of my mum.
From Birmingham, sisters Pam and Alice, also mourning their mother.
Our mum would sit in front of the telly when the Queen speak, and she would always used to be quiet around my friends on telly.
And my mum always said, if it wasn't for her, we wouldn't be here. When we was growing up, she She always told us that the Queen invited us Indian people here.
You're like staring away at everybody, aren't you?
3-month-old Bobby will never know the Queen.
She's been such an inspiration, a lady. Bringing Bobby was about, yes, she's part of history, but it's something we'll be able to talk about.
The words and music from the service filled the mall, captivating, moving this open-air congregation. Across the generations, who will ever forget this moment?
It's humbling to have been here, and I think to have brought Bobby, it's the future as well. You know, this is the end of an era, but also the start of a new one. I'd echo the Queen and Vera Lynn in, you know, it wasn't necessarily a goodbye, but a we'll meet again.
May you rest in peace. You served this country well. You served us all well. She was everybody's queen, all our queen. So she's done us proud still.
The British people loved having her as their queen. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
Among the mourners in the streets around central London, Windsor and elsewhere were many military veterans. For those who've served in the Army, the Royal Navy or the Royal Air Force, the Queen was their Commander-in-Chief, and many wanted to be present to say their farewells. Our special correspondent Fergal Keane has been speaking to veterans about what the Queen meant to them and hearing their tributes.
Once he was a soldier. And today Mark Taylor said goodbye to his Commander-in-Chief. He is a veteran of Kosovo and Iraq. He came home from war with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thinking of all my mates that I've lost, family that I've lost. Yeah, it just brings it all to a head. But yeah, honoured, proud to have served. Definitely proud to have served.
There were veterans from across the services. The faces of wars fought in the Queen's long reign. And of those who served when she was a princess. Like Robin Rowland, now 100. He fought in the jungles of Burma in World War II.
I was glad to be given a job which involved fighting in the front line and fighting along with my colleagues. She has made her subjects look at themselves, and if there's anything to be done which is a right and wrong way of doing it, she has taught them to do the right thing at the right time, and she has endeavoured to tell them what service means and giving yourself to the task in hand.
But in war, obeying the call to duty is so often the story of the young who do not come home. Watching today's funeral, Tony and Sandy Lewis. Their 22-year-old son, Conrad, was killed in Afghanistan in 2011. These funeral rites evoking memories of a dead boy.
Conrad would have been delighted to have been there, but equally was delighted to have pledged his allegiance to the then Queen Elizabeth. I don't just think of my family, but I think of all those, and especially all those families that were bereaved in Afghanistan.
In this way, present grief summoned the memory of older sacrifice. Fergal Keane, BBC News at the Cenotaph.
It wasn't just in Westminster and Windsor that people were able to see the Queen's coffin. The 22-mile route from London's Wellington Arch to Windsor Castle provided plenty of opportunities for the public to say a final goodbye. Adina Campbell has been speaking to some of those who went out to witness the moment the Queen's coffin went past on her final journey here to Windsor.
Today was always going to be a family occasion. In Hounslow, West London, the Lopez family would normally be celebrating Ivana's birthday, but those plans have been pushed aside, and cheer has been replaced by silence.
It's very hard to watch. Very emotional. Yeah, emotional. 96, she ran the country.
They wanted to see the Queen face to face, but we won't get a chance to see in the future now.
It was kind of upsetting by seeing a lovely Queen's dead.
Outside, the crowds were ready to say their final goodbyes. And joining them, the Lopez family, who made the short walk from their front door to the front of the line.
It means a lot for our family to come here and see this is the last day of the Queen's.
When we knew the Queen was going down the A4, we were really, really happy. So we've come here about 2 hours ago and we've been waiting.
I think she served the country for so many years, and I think she was a great person and she helped a lot of people.
She's done a lot for our country, and it's important we all get to see her pass.
And then, the moment they'd been waiting for. You've come from Goa. Tell me all it means for you and your family.
The Queen has allowed for other people to come here and to work, and now since we are here for so many years, it's like a home for us. It was really emotional. We were just clapping just to give her as a token of thanks.
A day they and this community say they'll never forget. Adina Campbell, BBC News, Hounslow.
A private ceremony took place here in Windsor tonight as the Queen was finally laid to rest. Earlier, the famous Long Walk here was packed, with thousands of people joining members of the armed forces to watch her final journey into the castle. My colleague Rita Chakrabarti was out and among the crowds today as Windsor remembered its most famous resident, the Queen.
The view from the Long Walk, recorded by thousands of devotees. This was not a crowd of world leaders or dignitaries, but of ordinary people who came to say goodbye.
I know. Been quite emotional through most of it, actually, to tell the truth, which is generally not me, so, and you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we just had to come up to witness it, like.
Yeah.
It's made me feel very emotional, but it was nice to see her come home and to say my final goodbye. And she'll be with Philip soon, won't she? So they'll be together.
There's an atmosphere of celebration here as well as sadness. Celebration of a long life well lived, as well as sadness that the Queen has finally gone. Earlier in the day, a different mood prevailed, of anticipation and even festivity. Some had evidently been here for hours, but young and not so young were all here to say farewell. The Peabody family from Northamptonshire were passing the time and wouldn't have been anywhere else.
You wouldn't have missed it for the world. I mean, the Queen has done so much for
Great Britain and the world, and we just needed to be here and ensure that we could pay our respects to her, as probably half of the UK and half of the world will be doing today. So just a tremendous honour to be here.
Headmistress Rhian Thornton camped out overnight, even though she didn't have far to come.
I live in Windsor and I work at the school, Upton, just over there. So we've got a little group of Upton families here, all here together. We used to wave to the Queen on her way to Royal Ascot as a school, so I wanted to just come and wave one last time for myself.
Many others came from far afield.
We got here at 10 o'clock last night, so we've been here all night.
Hadiel Miller and family travelled all the way from Yorkshire.
It's great how we all come together as a nation.
Something bonding.
I think we're all in quite high spirits today, but at the moment, but the mood will definitely change later.
And it did. Solemnity and tears, and then the 2-minute silence. As the procession with the hearse went past, applause rippled up the long walk, with people showing their appreciation in the simplest way. It was quiet, but there was deep emotion too.
She's been a constant presence in all of our lives from, she's the only monarch that we know and remember, so it's lovely to see her last moments here.
It's wonderful to be here with so many people of from all over the country, and to pay our final respects to the Queen, her final long walk.
So many reasons to be here. Community, commemoration and straightforward affection. A day that no one here will ever forget. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Windsor.
Well, let's go live now to Daniela Ralph. And Daniela, Windsor came out in force, as we saw there, to pay tribute to its most famous resident, and Windsor was somewhere that meant a great deal to the late Queen.
Yes, it did. Windsor has been her home in recent years. It was where she was based during the COVID lockdown. It's where she celebrated baptisms and weddings during her reign. It's where she worshipped at Easter in particular with her family, and it is where we saw her say that last lonely farewell to her husband, Prince Philip. So Windsor is fittingly the Queen's final resting place. This evening, she has been buried here in the King George VI Memorial Chapel alongside her husband and with her father, mother and sister. And at the end of a day where the royal family has shared so much of its grief with the public, this was a private moment for them. A chance for those who knew the Queen best, for those who loved her the most, to say goodbye away from the public gaze.
Daniela Ralph, thank you. Well, as we've heard, the service in Westminster Abbey was attended by more than 2,000 people, which included heads of state from around the world as well as foreign royalty. Aside from the security challenges, the day also brought some diplomatic sensitivities. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale looks at the day world leaders descended on London to pay their respects.
As the King's car passed the many Commonwealth flags en route to the Abbey, it was clear that this funeral transcended national borders. She was, one biographer wrote, Queen of the world, and today's symbols and service bore witness to that truth. Political leaders may have flown from all corners of the world, but their final journey was by bus, just as these African leaders had travelled to Buckingham Palace last night. Again today, there were just too many VIPs for them all to come by car, so they came together and queued together. In they came, some 500 foreign dignitaries in all, including about 100 heads of state and government. From North America, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, and his wife, they didn't take the bus. And Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, who did. He first met the Queen when he was just a boy. From Europe came President Macron, who has spoken so warmly of French affection for the Queen, and kings and queens from across the continent, from Spain to Sweden, Norway to the Netherlands. There were leaders too from the other side of the world, from New Zealand and Australia and many of the Pacific Isles. From Africa A long line of statesmen and women, especially from the Commonwealth, the international organisation the Queen shaped and nurtured. And it was on the Commonwealth that so many prayers dwelt.
With gratitude, we remember her unswerving commitment to a high calling over so many years as Queen and head of the Commonwealth.
Let us give thanks for Queen Elizabeth's commitment to the Commonwealth throughout her reign.
Then, as the service ended, it was time for the foreign guests to get back to their queues and their buses. And yes, that is the King and Queen of Spain, waiting in line like the rest. As for the President and some other leaders, well, it was straight to the airport, next stop New York, and a big United Nations summit. Back in the Mall, the Queen's coffin continued its procession, escorted by Mounties from Canada, a country she liked to call home, and an array of servicemen and women from across the Commonwealth, a body to which she had devoted her life and which today, in return, honoured her memory. James Landale, BBC News.
The Queen died on the 8th of September in Balmoral, and since acceding to the throne, King Charles has taken part in services of remembrance in all the nations of the country. In a moment, we'll hear from our correspondent Howell Griffith in Wales and Emma Vardy in Northern Ireland. But first, our Scotland editor James Cook on the events held today in honour of the Queen across the UK.
400 miles north of London, a lone lament for Elizabeth. The Royal Yacht Britannia is long retired, but its crew will never forget serving their Queen.
It's a sad moment and it's a sad day today because you'll never ever get the likes of Her Majesty the Queen again. She was one of. She was loved throughout the world. She was a monarch, she was a sovereign, and she was a mother. And in a way, she was our mother on here.
She was respected here too, outside her Edinburgh home, the Palace of Holyrood House, at the foot of the Royal Mile. Last week, this ancient thoroughfare, where history seeps from every stone, was packed as the Queen lay in rest here at St Giles Cathedral. Today, with the funeral underway in London, it is quieter, but by no means silent. On Royal Deeside, though, where the Queen spent her final hours, the funeral was a private affair, observed away from the cameras. But not everywhere was closed. Back in Edinburgh, the Crichtons, visiting from New Zealand, found a pub which was showing the ceremony.
The Queen and the royal family, despite being many, many thousands of miles away, we followed them and we felt that they were still part of our lives.
And yet, closer to home, a very different view. Is the monarchy important to you and your life?
No. They're symbols, but I don't see how they impact my life at all. There's no use for it for us. All it is road closures at the end of the day.
And I get obviously the Queen's been doing it, she was doing it for over 70 years, which is amazing. She didn't choose that life, and that's something that we do sympathise with a little bit. But yeah, no, it's not our... I don't think we need it anymore.
That debate will continue under Charles, with Elizabeth now anchored in history. James Cook, BBC News, Edinburgh.
A faithful few feeling part of something much greater. At St Elvan's Church in Aberdare, they came to share their grief and show their reverence.
It was very emotional and I think we all cried. I think it was first when she came out and they put her coffin on the carriage. That's the bit that got me.
For Sarah, there was a personal connection too.
The Queen did so much for the people, and I just wanted to be with the people who've brought me a lot of comfort since my mother passed away in 2020, so that's pretty much why I came. It's like losing your grandmother, isn't it?
Who has taught us by his holy apostle St Paul.
From the theatre in Colwyn Bay to care homes up and down Wales, small groups gathered, finding comfort in company. In Caernarfon, a few veterans paid their own silent tribute.
Unlike other parts of the UK, there were no ceremonial events in Wales today to mark the funeral, no big screens in public places. But this is still seen by some as a significant moment here, the end of a relationship that stretched back before Elizabeth's time as Queen.
She came first as a princess and in 1946 was made a member of the Gorsedd, the Welsh Circle of Poets, and given the bardic name Elizabeth or Windsor. In the latter part of her reign, it was the Senedd which became the centre of the relationship, signalling royal approval for what became Wales's parliament.
She redefined the United Kingdom. She said, I'm going to do what I did in Scotland in Wales if you want me to do it. So just ask me. Just invite me.
It's a legacy welded into Wales's history after an era where so much has changed. Hywel Griffith, BBC News, Aberdare.
In Belfast, the grounds of City Hall provided a window to the ceremony in Westminster. For those who consider themselves British, this was a final farewell to a much-loved head of state.
She means a lot to Northern Ireland. I suppose this country has its friction over the years, but she's been kind of a force for reconciliation, hasn't she?
She'll never be forgotten, will she? Ever, ever. I'm getting emotional, I'm sorry.
There's been a sense of stillness and quiet here in Belfast today as the sounds and hymns from the funeral have echoed around the city centre and people have paused to pay their respects and feel a sense of connection to the events happening in London. But while much of the UK has been captivated by the royal events, nationalist areas of Northern Ireland have a different relationship with the monarchy. In Newry, near the Irish border, many businesses remained open.
It's fascinating to watch the pageantry and stuff like that there, but it's not the be-all and end-all. She was a lovely, lovely lady, but it's just business as usual.
I remember Dublin City.
After years of conflict here between Unionists and Nationalists, the late Queen had helped to bridge divides.
Within the nationalist and Republican community, royalty isn't something that would be top of everybody's agenda. That said, there is respect for our neighbours. She's viewed as somebody who's contributed to the peace here.
Let us pray for His Majesty the King.
And back in Belfast, in laying to rest the Queen, thoughts also turned to the future.
Do you think King Charles can be that same symbol of peace building that the Queen was?
I think the answer to that's yes. There's still issues of hurt and there's still issues of divided community, so all of that, still has to be addressed, but the foundation stones are there.
And today, Belfast joined with millions in saying an affectionate goodbye. Emma Vardy, BBC News.
Let's take a look now at how people have been following the funeral elsewhere in England. The ceremony was broadcast in venues in many parts of the country, including at St Wolfram's Church in Grantham, where people had gathered from early this morning. This was the scene in Leeds, where hundreds of people, young and old, gathered in the drizzle in Millennium Square to pay their respects to the Queen. And dock workers in Southampton paid their own special tribute to Her Majesty, using shipping containers to mark her passing. While along the south coast at Dover, the late Queen's image has been projected onto the cliffs and can be seen for miles around. In villages, towns and cities across the length and breadth of the country, people came together today to watch the funeral in an act of public remembrance. Our special correspondent, Ed Thomas, is in Hull tonight, and we can join him there now. Ed.
Yes, Fiona, this is Hull's City Hall, and we're standing in Queen Victoria Square, hundreds of miles from the capital. But the heaviness and significance of the today was very much felt here. Hours before the state funeral, people were talking in hushed tones here. And for those who came to watch on the big screen, there was a deep respect for the Queen. And for some, there was also a personal connection. From Westminster Abbey to the Humber, this was Hull's day to look back.
Everyone sort of come together and the children will remember and hopefully they'll tell their children.
Moments never to be forgotten.
So historic and so special, and she was such a good role model.
Together to say thank you to the Queen.
Just immensely proud to be British and to see what this country can do.
So when the Queen came, it was a bit nervous because it's a bit scary having the Queen watching you do your job.
5 years ago, Melissa Tweddle met the Queen.
That's me there, look. Getting ready to do a pretend cesarean section.
At the time, she was a student midwife, just beginning her career.
Everybody was really excited. I had to make sure that I didn't trip over anything and drop the baby. Today, although it's a funeral, it's also like a celebration of everything that she's achieved, what she's done. And we'll always have this story to tell of when Mummy met the Queen. And you'll probably end up telling your children and things like that, won't you, when the time comes?
Oh, she looks so happy. I remember that beautiful blue outfit and her amazing skin and twinkly eyes, a beautiful smile.
Sophie was just 6 when, bouquet in hand, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh came to Hull.
Look at your face, you're mesmerised.
Now 18, it's a time the family will always remember.
The Queen, she's shown leadership and that sense of duty and commitment, and as far as we feel, she hasn't put a foot wrong in leading this country.
And been an inspiration for not just our generation, but many others.
Andy met the Queen in 2017. He's been recognised by St John Ambulance, organises Hull Pride. His has been a life of volunteering. What did the Queen mean to you?
I think the best of us. I think somebody who demonstrates that dedication of service and a life's commitment to her work. And it's just incredible to think that that person has gone.
People sharing this moment, touched by the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II.
It was just really sad. Now, I'm still sad, but I think it's a great way to remember her.
9-year-old Ava Tweddle ending that report by Ed Thomas. Well, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell is here with me. So Nicholas, we have seen the most remarkable scenes of pageantry today to bid farewell to the late Queen. And now we begin a new era.
An extraordinary day, 12 extraordinary days really, and it's all gone smoothly. The succession, the transition has by and large gone smoothly, and of course that's terribly important for a hereditary monarchy. What's also important for a monarchy is that it should be something that brings people together, and I think that has happened over these past 12 days. Now, not everybody is a supporter of constitutional monarchy, we know that, but I think the evidence suggests that this ancient land, if you like, broadly speaking, remains comfortable with this ancient institution, the monarchy. 3 quick points. The Constitution. Charles, the King, has made it clear that he will follow the example of his mother, so no meddling. The Union. He's visited all the home nations. Scotland, we know, will be something of a challenge. Faith. He made a speech to faith leaders on Friday, said he wanted to be sovereign of all communities. He takes that very, very seriously. The realms, the countries of which the British monarch is also head of state, we know that some of them are reviewing their links to the crown. Buckingham Palace really quite relaxed and realistic about this. These things are going to take months, no, years to really settle down. But what of the immediate prospect as these heightened emotions settle down and we return to normal? I think for the King, for his advisors, there is a feeling of satisfaction and relief that the succession has gone as well as it has after all the anxieties that there have been in recent years, and that the reign of King Charles III has got off to a strong start.
Nicholas Witchell, thank you. Well, Gurkhas from Maidstone took part in the funeral procession today. British Gurkhas have served as part of the army for more than 200 years, and its regiments swear allegiance to the monarch. In Nepal, British Gurkha veterans gathered to pay their respects, including a wreath-laying ceremony in front of a tree planted by the Queen in 1986. Our South Asia correspondent, Yogita Limai, reports now on how the Gurkha brigades and people in Nepal have been remembering the Queen.
Thousands of miles from London, beyond the boundaries of faith and nationalities. Shared respect for the Queen. Buddhist monks offer prayers at a monastery in Kathmandu, chanting for peace for the Queen's soul and for everyone who knew her. Major Bhim Bahadur Gurung, a retired British Gurkha, served as the Queen's orderly in 1975.
Today, I got opportunity to pray for the Queen, and we wish rest in peace, very lovely, Her Majesty Queen.
With a reign spanning 70 years, some who served her couldn't be here. Captain Ram Bahadur Limbu is Nepal's only living recipient of the Victoria Cross. His decades of service meant he was invited to the funeral, but he couldn't travel. And so a condolence book was taken by the British ambassador to his home, 250 miles from Kathmandu. "I'm deeply saddened by the Queen's death," he wrote.
She used to speak to us like we were part of her family. She was soft-spoken and had clarity of thought.
A lifetime bond with the Queen and her country.
Nepal's relationship with the British monarchy is quite different compared to most of South Asia. It wasn't a colony of the British Empire, and one of the reasons is the more than 200-year-old agreement that allows Gurkhas to serve with the UK military. And even among ordinary people here, we found a lot of affection for the British royal family.
On the street, we met Divakar Saha, who was eager to talk to us about the funeral.
I am very saddened. I respect her. May her soul may remain in peace in heaven. Yeah, all my thoughts and prayer are with the British people.
So how old were you, sir, when you saw Queen Elizabeth?
I was at the time 15 years of age.
One of the millions around the world who have their own memories of the Queen. From near and far, today they said goodbye. Yogdalamai, BBC News, Kathmandu.
Today was the culmination of 11 days of mourning here and around the world. People have attended events in their hundreds of thousands, remembering and paying respect to the Queen, who's been a constant in British life for the 96 years of her life. Our home editor Mark Easton looks at how the country has been remembering the Queen, her life and legacy.
I name this ship Queen Elizabeth II.
There is a hole in our nation's life where the Queen used to be.
Queen Elizabeth II went down to meet the sea.
A golden chain has been broken. A requiem played to a kingdom's proud past.
When the Queen came to the throne, Britain and the world were still coping with the privations and aftermath of the Second World War, and still living by the conventions of earlier times.
Figurehead of the greatest generation, the Queen was respected for values burnished by war. Patient queuing, a fitting act to honour a sovereign who understood the significance of good manners, especially in dark days.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
Her death detaches living memory from the country's finest hour. But her parting is cloaked in a pall of patriotism that emboldens national self-belief. She and the institution she represents have framed Britain as a country with a special place in history and the world. Representatives from every corner have come to honour our Queen.
This is a nation, a commonwealth, a world saying farewell to the longest reigning British monarch.
The United Kingdom stands proudly in the spotlight of global attention. But it is a day edged in black.
Many in Britain are mourning their Queen, but also the death of an idea. Elizabeth signified a country unwavering in its commitment to duty and to decency.
Goodwill is better than resentment. Tolerance is better than revenge.
Compassion is better than anger. Above all, a lively concern for the interests of others as well as our own.
The Queen understood loss. "Grief is the price we pay for love," she famously wrote in a letter to the US President after 9/11. Grief was on parade in London today. And so her kingdom comes to the moment of farewell. The chapter is complete. Tonight we shall feel the weight of its final full stop. Mark Easton, BBC News.
We'll look back at some of the extraordinary images of the day in just a moment. But first, let's get the latest weather forecast and join Ben Rich. Hi, Ben.
Fiona, thank you. Good evening. The weather stayed fine for today's historic events in London and Windsor. In fact, the sun even came out for a while. But as night fell, the cloud thickened and some splashes of rain worked through. Some damp weather pushing across London and Windsor during this evening. And there is extensive cloud cover currently draped across many parts of the UK. And where you do see some clear spells through the night, there are likely to be some mist and fog patches. The odd spot of rain, not least in the northwest of Scotland. Temperatures under the cloud between 9 and 12 degrees, a little chillier than that if you see clear spells overhead. Now into tomorrow, yes, there will be a lot of cloud, that cloud thickest across western parts of Northern Ireland, the northwest of Scotland, with the odd spot of rain. But through eastern Scotland, eastern counties of Northern Ireland, across England and Wales, we should see some sunny spells, the best of the sunshine, just as today, across the southwest of England and West Wales. And feeling a little warmer than it has done, with temperatures between 16 and 19, maybe 20 degrees. Now, during tomorrow night, a lot of the cloud should tend to break. There will be some fog patches that develop for Wednesday morning, but Wednesday should be a sunnier day for most of us. And with southwesterly winds, yes, it is going to feel quite warm. 19 degrees for Aberdeen, 21 for Norwich and for London, but some rain into the northwest of Scotland in association with this frontal system, which will be pushing its way southeastwards during Thursday and into Friday, and that will bring some outbreaks of rain, and behind it a return to cooler conditions. So we'll see rain pushing southwards for the end of the week, and those temperatures will start to drop. That's the latest weather. Let's go back to Fiona in Windsor.
Ben, thanks very much. And that is all from us here in Windsor Castle tonight, on the day the nation and the world said farewell to Queen Elizabeth. In a moment, we'll join my colleagues across the nations and regions for the news where you are. But first, we'll leave you with some of the spectacular and poignant moments of today, remembering the extraordinary reign of the Queen. From all of us here, good night.
Will you solemnly promise and swear to govern the peoples of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
I solemnly promise so to do.
Rarely has such a promise been so well kept. Her calm,
and dignified presence has given us confidence to face the future as she did, with courage and with hope.